Good evening. I'm David Brinkley in Washington. John Chancellor in New York will be along. The Arab hijackers forced the Pan American 747 to land in Cairo, where they gave the passengers 8 minutes to get off. When they were off, they blew up the plane. All the passengers are safe. They got out just in time. 2 other planes, a TWA 707 and a SwissAir DC-8, are still held at a remote airport out in the desert in Jordan. Some passengers have been released, but others are still held inside the planes. And the Arabs now threaten to blow them up unless Arab prisoners held in several countries are released. Pan American 747 was hijacked in Europe and then flown to Beirut, Lebanon, where it landed and picked up more Arabs who began wiring the plane with explosives while it flew on to Cairo.
The big 747 stayed on the ground for 3 hours in Beirut. While the plane was refueled, the hijackers on the plane talked to other Palestinian guerrillas inside the Beirut control tower. Lebanese officials asked that women and children be allowed to leave the plane, but this request was turned down. The hijackers wanted to go to Amman, Jordan, but finally settled on Cairo as an alternative. The Beirut airport is not supposed to be able to handle 747s, so when this one got off safely, spectators broke into spontaneous applause.
In Cairo, the passengers were told they'd have 8 minutes to get off, but 3 minutes after landing, the Pan American 747 blew up. There were 3 hijackers on the flight from Beirut to Cairo. While one held a gun on the pilot and a second told the passengers what was going to happen, a third planted 9 explosive charges inside the giant plane. With only 3 minutes to get out, the 154 passengers and 19 crew members used the plane's escape chutes. Most followed emergency procedures and left their shoes behind. At least 7 passengers were injured in the scramble to escape. 2 of the stewardesses were treated at the Cairo airport. Other passengers with more serious injuries were treated at Cairo hospitals. Most of the passengers were Americans. Miraculously, all were accounted for. Before landing at Cairo, the hijackers made the pilot circle the city several times to make sure the plane landed where they wanted it to. Some of the passengers seemed badly shaken by the ordeal. For others, it seemed like just another hijacking. A stewardess said the children, there were about 10 on board, were marvelous. The pilot told Egyptian officials at the Cairo airport that the hijackers were Palestinians who blew up his jumbo jet to protest against American policy in the Middle East. According to witnesses, 2 of the hijackers appeared to be Negroes. The third looked like a Palestinian. At break of dawn, all that was left of the plane was a charred hulk with only part of the tailpiece still intact. Later in the day, a Pan American 707 flew 162 of the passengers and crew who felt able to make the trip from Cairo to Rome. When the plane came to a halt in Rome, ambulances drove out and took 4 of the more seriously injured passengers to a hospital in the city. Exhaustion was beginning to tell on the others, although most planned to keep going as fast as possible back to New York.
You probably realize that. I've done a lot of radio.
Nobody knew anything till we were on the plane, of course. But we thought something was wrong right from the beginning when we left Amsterdam. Because there were a couple of gentlemen and the names were called a couple of times.
No, they were up in the first class compartments.
I see.
One of them went up to the cockpit. This was the big plane, 747.
Quite a few men, 9 to be exact, got on in Beirut. They brought on other guns, and one of them brought on a 45. One of them brought on a satchel of incendiary explosives.
Oh, well, I think 35 minutes before we landed in Cairo, we didn't know really if we were going to land there or not. They were unsure if it is Cairo or not. That's why they didn't trust our pilots, I guess.
After the passengers were evacuated, they sent word upstairs, and he said we had 2 minutes to get out. It was going to blow, so we got?
Well, there were a series of small explosions that started at the nose of the plane,
cockpit, and then
lasting over a period of, I would say, at least 15 minutes.
Oh, it made me sick. $25 million, and what another waste. I guess they proved their point.
NBC News correspondent Wilson Hall is at the desert airstrip in Jordan, where the other two planes are still held, but he cannot get a television circuit to the U.S. He reports the Arabs made their own films of the TWA and the SwissAir planes and then tried to sell the film. When NBC refused to do business with them, they confiscated NBC's cameras at gunpoint. The planes still stand on the field in the desert sun, the women and children released, but the male passengers, including about 100 Americans and many Israelis, are still held. And they say they will be held until Arab prisoners in Switzerland, West Germany, and Britain are released. John?
In separate but equally agonized actions, the governments of West Germany and Switzerland agreed today to release 6 Arab terrorists as the hijackers demanded. In West Germany, 3 terrorists are in custody in Munich following an attack against an El Al Israeli airliner last February 10th at Munich airport. In the attack, 1 person was killed and another 11 were wounded. In Zurich, Switzerland, the Swiss had sentenced 2 men and a woman terrorist to 12 years in prison each after an attack with a submachine gun against an Israeli plane at Zurich airport in February. In that encounter, 1 terrorist was killed by an Israeli guard. Now, all 6 will be released.
Switzerland today bowed to Palestinian guerrilla demands and agreed to free 3 Arab commandos in prison here as ransom for the 155 persons aboard a SwissAir DC-8 hijacked to Jordan. The decision came at a 7-hour meeting held in this building today, a meeting by the local Zurich canton government, which has jurisdiction in the case. If there was any opposition here to the decision, it was overcome certainly by strong pressure from the federal Swiss government, which said it saw no alternative but to pay the price. The 3 Arab commandos are in a prison near Zurich, serving a 12-year sentence for their attack against an El Al 707 at Zurich airport last year. Today, the Swiss government announced that the exchange of the captured DC-8 and its passengers for the 3 Arab commandos will be carried out by the International Red Cross. All of that providing that the Swiss action today still satisfies the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. But amid its continuing changes of demands and the general confusion, no one here is sure it will. Garrick Utley, NBC News, Zurich.
The International Airline Pilots Association has scheduled an emergency meeting in London to begin in a few hours to consider the hijackings. And Kurt Hammarskjöld, Director General of the International Air Transport Association, called today on President Nasser of Egypt and Jordan's King Hussein to arrest the hijackers. Hammarskjöld also said that if the Egyptians don't release the hijacked passengers, it will be the end of civil aviation in Egypt. Egypt, he said, would not be able to have an international airline if it did not free the passengers.
This is NBC Nightly News, Monday, September 7th, 1970.
He's 100 miles away, and I miss him every day, and I want him back to stay 100 years.
It's been the same since Valley Forge. A lonely soldier, a long way from home. USO gets no government funds. It depends entirely on your help. So please give. Its work is not done as long as there's one serviceman away from home.
The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the organization which says it's doing all this, denied tonight in Amman, Jordan, that it was seeking the release of Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan is in death row at San Quentin Prison, the convicted assassin of Senator Robert Kennedy. Earlier today, a guerrilla spokesman in Beirut, apparently on his own, had included Sirhan's name in the list of those they want released. When Governor Ronald Reagan of California heard the news, he's the only one who could release Sirhan, he said he would not give in to blackmail. And tonight, the guerrillas say anyway, they don't want Sirhan. The president was kept informed throughout the day of the activities of the hijacker. At the State Department, officials said that Secretary of State Rogers was much involved and that the situation was being discussed with other governments. A number of ambassadors visited the State Department today, including Yitzhak Rabin, the ambassador of Israel.
We look upon the air piracy as a criminal act. We don't believe that anyone should submit to the blackmail of those who carry out piracy and criminal acts in the airways. And we look upon the governments that their carrier were hijacked to be responsible for the release of all the passengers that were on board.
Rabin said the United States and Switzerland have the responsibility to obtain the release of all passengers on the TWA and SwissAir planes. The State Department said that was probably true under international law, but it was not clear what the United States could do since no Arab guerrillas are held prisoner in this country for exchanging. The State Department believes the demand for the release of Sirhan was a propaganda stunt by an Arab commando group not involved in the hijacking. Officials here said the United States probably would negotiate with the hijackers at some point, probably through the International Red Cross. One official said the United States considers the hijackers to be desperate types, as shown by the destruction of the Pan Am plane in Cairo, and the United States has information that the guerrillas have the means to destroy the two planes in Jordan. The State Department insisted that no American troops or military units have been put on alert, and the department said an attempt to go in and try to rescue the passengers was not even being considered. Ron Nessen, NBC News at the State Department.
NBC News learned today that the government is beefing up the number of federal marshals assigned to John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. Marshals have been there on security duties, but others are now moving in significant numbers to guard against more hijacks. Last night, actually early today, there was a lot of emotion at JFK when the El Al airliner that was unsuccessfully hijacked finally reached New York.
Can we see the picture?
Today more than ever before, or certainly more, I can identify with it now where I couldn't perhaps before, that something has to be done now, that the world certainly cannot sit by and allow these things to happen, and allow these terrorists to dictate the illegal way of life. But if we're going to have any law and order, if we're going to have any safety in the skies and safety on earth for that matter, then the civilized world has to stand up and say it outright and do something about it.
Some Arabs charged today that the Israelis sent a flying commando force over Jordan last night to rescue the hostage passengers. The Arabs say Israeli paratroopers rode in 16 helicopters but were driven off. The Israelis say they didn't do it. David?
When the El Al plane was hijacked by two Arabs over England, there was a fight 7 miles in the air, and one hijacker was killed, and the other, a woman, was captured. She is Leila Khalid, 23 years old, and she successfully hijacked a TWA plane to Syria last summer. She was never punished and instead became a folk hero in the Arab countries. She is active in the Arab equivalent of something like women's liberation, since she says her two main causes in life are freedom for women and freedom for Palestine. In London today, her fellow hijacker was dead, and she was held by the police.
Leila Khaled hid under a raincoat as she was transferred to a secret London jail. Prime Minister Heath held an emergency meeting tonight to consider whether to give in to Arab commando demands and turn the girl loose. LL had more trouble at London airport today. An anonymous phone call touched off a bomb threat. 80 passengers had already boarded the plane for Tel Aviv. The plane was searched. Passengers stepped off to identify their baggage. No bomb was found. At airports all over Europe, security was tighter than before. In Munich, suspicious passengers were frisked. And the airport was heavily guarded. Police with machine pistols kept a close eye on passenger baggage. They guarded passengers going from the terminal to planes. Frankfurt Airport looked much the same. In Paris and at other continental airports, Pan American required passengers to pass through a gun detector machine. If the passenger carried any hidden metal, it showed up on a dial and the person was subject to search. All these things help, but the airlines frankly admit no one has come up with an effective way to combat air piracy. Ray Scherer reporting.
NBC Nightly News continues after this announcement.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello, I'm Neil Armstrong. I'll never forget that first step on the moon. And speaking of steps, the first one you should take in planning your family's future is to save. I recommend United States savings bonds. Money set aside on the payroll savings plan at work or the bond-a-month plan at your bank will stay safe till you need it to make your dreams come true. Buy a savings bond. Good for you and your country.
Again today, Israel charged the Egyptians were still building missile bases inside the ceasefire zone. The Soviet Union said the Israelis had effectively scuttled any chance for a peace settlement by refusing to talk with Egypt and Jordan. And that's where that stood today. In South Vietnam, more withdrawals of American troops were announced, about 3,000, they said, within the next few weeks, and that will make 11,000 in all in about 5 weeks. And American troop strength there now is down below 400,000, the lowest in 3 years. John?
Some Labor Day items. Jacob Potofsky of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers said that 9 years of American presence in Vietnam have cost $100 billion and that the real losers in the war, along with the dead and the maimed, are the poor. The International Monetary Fund today reported on the world economy. It found that the United States is behind schedule in its efforts to stop rising prices and that the administration's plan is having, in the words of the report, a more severe impact on the real economy than was hoped for, which means unemployment. The report says that the importance of fixing up the American economy cannot be exaggerated in terms of world price stability. And the Monetary Fund report hinted that the administration could get a little tougher with both business and labor.
With only a week remaining before the auto strike deadline, negotiators, the United Auto Workers Union, and the Big Three automakers continue their contract talks today in Detroit. But today's negotiations were at the subcommittee level, not at the so-called big table where the important decisions and agreements are really made. After one of today's sessions at Chrysler, UAW Vice President Douglas Frazier said the next move is up to the companies.
I question really is to the value of a big table discussion until the companies are ready to put out their offer. I told the company today that my evaluation was that we're going to have to get at this quickly now if we're to avoid a strike. with just a week to go, we know, and they know, and I hope they know that we know that they haven't put out their offer yet. And it seems to me that the serious discussion has to flow from their first realistic offer. That should be the springboard.
Company officials decline comment. There's no indication when they might make their second wage offer. The union has named General Motors and Chrysler as possible strike targets, but has not decided if a strike would be called against one or both. But union officials do say there's little likelihood of any contract extension beyond the September 14th deadline. Joe Mossbrook, NBC News, Detroit.
In Chicago, Labor Day went almost unnoticed. One of the few parades was held on the city's southeast side, an area of steel mill employees and blue-collar workers. But even here it was difficult to drum up enthusiasm for the holiday celebration. The East Side Labor Day Committee says it took $4,000 to put this parade on, but they had a difficult time getting money in marchers. Labor unions, which had donated $200 last year, gave nothing this year. In Chicago's downtown Loop area, there was no parade at all. An organizer of the East Side Labor Day festivities could not explain her neighbors' diminishing interest in the holiday. She said the 11th annual parade may be the last unless people show more interest. David Klein, NBC News, Chicago.
Is big business these days. Its temples of power are everywhere, a testament to the position it now occupies as a pillar of the American establishment. Critics suggest prosperity has caused much of the union movement to lose its crusading spirit. The traditional ties with the Democratic Party are under strain. AFL-CIO President George Meany and other union officials believe the party is bending too far leftward. All of this raises a question about labor's future political course.
I suppose one of the most significant things for the labor movement has been in the last 25 years the explosion of much of the working class into the middle class. And the fact that now many workers live outside the central cities of our big metropolitan areas, out in the suburbs. And many of them may be more worried about the crabgrass than they are about Taft-Hartley or 14B or what you might call the classic issues of the trade union movement.
So what is the future of the labor movement and the Democratic Party?
Well, I'd say, really, the labor vote is up for grabs. It's not certainly going Republican. The workers aren't political yo-yos. They're going to change a normal loyalty quickly and cavalierly. There are issues that hold the worker to the Democratic Party, economic issues. There are other issues, social issues, student unrest, demonstrations, crime in the streets, muggings, on which some workers seem to feel that the Democratic Party leaders, or some of them at least, are pretty soft. I would say that the labor vote will probably stay Democratic unless the mass of the trade union movement gets convinced that the Democratic leadership and party are going to move as far off to the kamikaze left as the Republicans moved off to the kamikaze right with Goldwater in '64.
And then what would happen?
Then, from the Democratic point of view, you'd simply have a collapse of the old Roosevelt coalition, a real fracturing of it, and they'd have to try and pick up pieces elsewhere. And from their point of view, I'm afraid that there just aren't that many pieces elsewhere that add up to 40 million Americans in a presidential election, or 51% of the vote.
President Nixon is observing Labor Day by having 190 labor leaders and their wives to dinner at the White House. After dinner, a lot of other people are coming over for a torchlight military tattoo. The government of India today abolished the title and privileges of being a Maharaja, which puts the country's 278 Maharajas out of work, along with their 200,000 servants and dependents. Among the privileges is the right to have a special license plate in red with your name on it. The Maharajas say they will appeal. David?
In a world that is already very noisy, the British, French, and Americans are working on another piece of hardware that will make still more noise, and lots of it, the supersonic airliner. The British are already test flying theirs, the Concorde 2, up and down the west coast of England, and its sonic boom is cracking mirrors and plaster, breaking windows, terrifying the cattle, and unhinging the hens.
Concorde took off for another supersonic test run down Britain's west coast. This time there apparently weren't as many complaints about the Anglo-French airliner's sonic booms, but it didn't fly as far either. Along the west coast boom alley, technicians are monitoring the sonic bang effects at crumbling ancient cathedrals and elsewhere. Crowds turn out to wait and wince a little. The booms have been blamed for a few cracks in walls, windows, and mirrors. But most people say the bangs haven't really been so terrible thus far. However, there's an exception. Welsh farmers in Pembrokeshire County are kicking up a noise of their own, complaining that Concorde's boom rattles the cattle and unhinges the hens.
Don't you think the cows and chickens and other animals will get used to these bangs?
Oh, it's a thing you can never get used to. I don't think if anybody fired a gun in your ear 3 times a day, you'd ever really get used to that. You'd still jump out of your skin. And I think one's got to recall that highly productive dairy cattle and poultry are just as susceptible to shock and fright as you and I are. But the great problem of it all, the bulk of these complaints, we just cannot assess in monetary terms. You can't put pounds, shillings and pence, or dollars for that matter, on the time spent by a farmer going and collecting his herd back together. This is the type of thing that one is worried about.
I'm afraid of the long-term effect that this is going to have on these cows, particularly the in-calf cows, because this sudden shock can't be doing a pregnant animal any good at all. And this could, in fact, cause me serious financial loss.
You mean through the cows aborting?
Through the cows aborting, through losing the calf, through losing milk supply as well.
Well, your brother's out today, but what did he say happened to the chickens?
Well, he was standing against his hen house, and the bang shook him. And the chickens went wild for a couple of minutes there.
They went wild, they ran around like chickens.
Yeah. They were shouting for a couple of seconds there.
Has there been any effect on egg production yet? You got 5,000 chickens here.
Yes. Yeah, there's been no effect in egg production up till now.
Well, what do you think about if these bangs go on over a long period?
Well, I think it may affect them over a long period. It may do them harm, but we don't know yet until it's tried out.
Concorde probably won't fly supersonic over land once the plane is in airline service. But 3 years of test flights up and down Boom Alley could result in many damage claims against the government by farmers whose cows and hens supposedly have suffered from the new-style barnstorming.
Thank you, and good night for NBC News.
Historian Kenneth Clark depicts milestones in the history of Western man for the past 1,600 years in a fascinating special, highlighting a coming series on public broadcasting stations. See Civilization, a preview, tomorrow at 7:30, 6:30 Central Time on NBC.
A special sports computer makes official predictions for the weekend college and professional football games. Join Paul Eels for Computer Football starting Thursday at 6. The Morning Show, weekdays at 6 on WSM Television Channel 4 in Nashville, Tennessee.